Hi there. The reason that these types of plots are called modified box and whisker plots is because essentially we've already completed a box and whisker plot, but to modify it, we are going to check for outliers, or for observations that are unusual. So when we talked about means and standard deviations, unusual was more than 2 standard deviations above or below the mean. So standard deviation was our measure of variability when we were working with the mean. Well, now our measure of variability is the IQR while we're working with the median. So we need another way to decide what is unusual, and in this case we call them outliers. And here's what we do. We take the interquartile range. We multiply it by 1.5. So literally we increase its size by 50%, and that is the amount of variability that we allow above Q3 or below Q1 before we consider an observation so unusual that it is an outlier. So we have to calculate what I call cutoffs. So here is the lower cutoff for an outlier. So literally you take Q1 and we're going to subtract away 1.5 times the interquartile range. So we're taking away the variability in the interquartile range, but we've increased it by 50%. So in this case, Q1, right here and right here, is -2 minus 1.5 times the interquartile range. The interquartile range is 3. So what this gives me is -2 minus 4.5. That gives me a lower cutoff of -6.5. So in order for a value to be considered an outlier on the low side, it would have to exceed -6.5. And when I say exceed, I mean be lower than -6.5. Our minimum is -6. So there are no outliers to the left. So the upper cutoff, in this case, we take Q3 and we add 1.5 times the interquartile range. So Q3 is 1, and we will add 1.5 times the IQR, that's 3. So that makes 1 plus 4.5 in this case, and that gives me an upper cutoff of 5.5. Now, I have a maximum of 8. There is clearly an outlier here. That 8 far exceeds the 5.5. So I need to modify, that's why it's called modified, I need to modify this box and whisker plot by indicating that that 8 is an outlier. This is why I put it in pencil. So to indicate that I have an outlier there, I'm going to go ahead and put a box there. This little box represents an outlier. It is far enough away from Q3, considering some additional variability. I'm allowing the IQR plus an additional 50% since I've multiplied the IQR by 1.5. That's the amount of variability that I'm willing to consider before I say that something is an outlier, or in some sense, before I say it's unusual. So if I mark an outlier, that means I need to shorten this whisker here. So the observation immediately before that outlier is a 2. So literally, I'm going to shorten this whisker, and I'm going to put my dot right here at 2. So this is what the modified box and whisker plot should look like, having modified for looking for, considering outliers using these criteria for calculating a lower cutoff for outliers and an upper cutoff or a boundary for outliers. We'll do that again in example 2. So here is the minimum. Here is my lower whisker. Here is the box. Here is the upper whisker, but it does not go all the way to the outlier. It stops at 2. It stops at 2, which is the value right before the outlier. The outlier is marked with this box up here at 8. That's how we modify a box and whisker plot by checking for outliers.